I outsourced my decisions to other people. I have made very few significant decisions in my life without first conducting what I can only describe as a canvassing operation. Before any choice of meaningful consequence, professional, relational, directional, I would move through the people closest to me and gather their assessments. Not passively. I would present the situation, offer my read of it, and wait for them to confirm or complicate what I thought. I was, on the surface, gathering input. What I was actually doing was waiting for enough external agreement to make it feel safe to move. This is different from being impulsive and correcting for it. The impulsive person acts before consulting and learns, through consequence, to gather more information. I was not that person. I was the person who consulted so extensively, from such an early stage, that the consultation had become a prerequisite, a structural component of the decision itself, without which the decision would not resolve. My own read of a situation was not sufficient to authorize action on it. I required external validation before the read could be treated as real. I had not examined this process closely enough to identify what it was actually for. Jo was my closest friend for most of the period I am describing. She is someone with a direct communication style and a tolerance for difficult conversations that I have always found both useful and, at times, slightly destabilizing. She would say what she thought. She would not perform uncertainty she did not have. When I brought her my decision canvassing operations, and I brought her many, over the course of years, she would engage genuinely, offer her view, and sometimes push back on my framing. She was, in this sense, an excellent person to consult. She consulted me in return, but with a different quality of engagement. When Jo came to me with a decision, she was usually close to having made it. She was testing the reasoning, not searching for permission to act on it. The conversation had a different function for her than the equivalent conversation had for me. About 4 years into the friendship, she said something that I have returned to many times since. We were discussing a situation in my life, a professional shift I had been considering for nearly a year, one I had talked through with her, with 2 other close friends, with a mentor, and at considerable length with myself. She listened to the latest iteration, and then she said, "I can't tell you what to do anymore. Not because I don't have a view, but because I don't think me having a view is the thing that's missing here." She was right. And the fact that she was right was the thing I needed to examine. What I had been doing, I came to understand, was using other people's agreement as a substitute for certainty. The underlying problem, the thing I had not yet found a way to address, was that I did not trust my own judgment sufficiently to act on it without external corroboration. When I had a read on a situation and several people I respected confirmed that read, the confirmation felt like something solid enough to stand on. Without the confirmation, the same read felt provisional. Fragile. Possibly wrong in ways I couldn't see. This is the mechanism, external validation seeking as doubt management. When your own capacity to tolerate the uncertainty of your own conclusions is insufficient, you supplement it by gathering the conclusions of others. If enough people agree with you, the aggregate feels more stable than your individual assessment. The doubt is not resolved, it is diluted. Distributed across enough confirmations, it becomes small enough to act through. The problem with this strategy is that it does not actually produce certainty. Other people's agreement is not the same thing as being right. They can agree with you and you can both be wrong. They can disagree and you can be right. The agreement is information, and information is useful, but it was not functioning for me as information, it was functioning as a precondition for permission. And permission, structured this way, is not something that can be reliably gathered. There is always another perspective. There is always another person who might see it differently. The canvassing operation has no natural termination point because it is not designed to produce knowledge, it is designed to produce a feeling. The feeling, being generated by consensus rather than by certainty, is perpetually vulnerable to the next dissenting view. What Jo had identified was that the missing ingredient was not information. I had information. I had her view and the views of others and my own view, all of which were pointing in the same direction. The missing ingredient was the willingness to act on my own assessment without waiting for the assessment to be confirmed into something less frightening than a personal judgment. That willingness is something I have had to build deliberately, and it is not fully built, it is ongoing. What I have identified as useful in building it is a distinction between consultation and authorization. Consultation is gathering information and perspective from people who have useful views. It is appropriate, it is often necessary, and it produces better decisions when used correctly. Authorization is asking someone else to make it acceptable for you to move. It looks like consultation. It uses the same external interactions. But its function is different, and it is worth learning to tell them apart in your own practice. The diagnostic I use: does the conversation clarify my understanding of the situation, or does it clarify whether I am allowed to act on what I already understand? If it is the second, I am not consulting. I am seeking authorization. And authorization is not available from other people, because the thing I am seeking permission for is an act that is entirely mine, a decision that will be made in my life and that I will live with, and no external voice has the standing to authorize it. The authorization must come from within, and the only way to generate it is through the practice of acting on your own judgment and surviving the results. What changed was a decision, initially uncomfortable, then gradually less so, to reduce the canvassing radius. Not to stop consulting people whose views I found valuable, but to stop treating the consultation as a precondition for movement. To bring my read of a situation to the point where I could recognize it as sufficient, and then act before it had been externally confirmed into a different category of thing. The first several decisions I made this way felt exposing in a specific sense. There was no distributed responsibility. If I moved and it was wrong, I could not point to the consensus I had gathered. I had gathered less consensus, sometimes none. The exposure was real and it was instructive, because what it demonstrated, over time, was that my own judgment was not the liability I had been treating it as. It was approximately as reliable as the consensus had been. And it was available immediately, without the delay of canvassing, without the anxiety of waiting for enough people to agree. Joe and I discussed this later, not the original moment, but the pattern it had surfaced. She said something that I found clarifying, that the confidence she had always had in her own judgments was not the absence of doubt. It was the decision to act despite it. The doubt was present for her too. It simply had not been granted veto power. Waiting for other people to dissolve your doubt is waiting for something that doesn't exist. The doubt is the condition of the decision. It does not leave before you act. It leaves, if it leaves at all, because you acted. That sequence cannot be reversed by gathering more opinions. It can only be discovered by moving first and seeing what the movement produces. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real. Do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable, it builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.